Riggio, Professor, Organizational Psychology. Ronald, Ph.D, is the Henry R. Kravis Professor of Leadership, as well as Organizational Psychology and former Director of the Kravis Leadership Institute at the Claremont McKenna College. And Professor Riggio is the author of over 150 books, book chapters, and research articles in the areas of leadership, assessment centers, and social psychology. He should certainly know a thing or two about good leadership, which is why exactly the point that he makes is about early life experiences that he says play a pivotal role in molding our self-esteem and empathy skills. They create the foundation upon which adulthood is built. That is where, in fact, the conversation with Ravi ended, and it segues in here pretty well. Ronald will delve into the implications of early childhood experiences and how they help create leaders and healthy adults. We managed to record his words for this Kindness Festival, and let's listen in.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here with you at the Kindness Festival. Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me. My name is Ron Riggio. I am a professor of leadership and organizational psychology at Claremont McKenna College in California in the United States. And what I would like to talk with you about today is good leadership. So let me share my PowerPoint and begin. So the title of my talk is, what does good leadership look like? And I'm a psychologist, and we know that basic psychological principles and what I sometimes call psychological tactics can be used to better understand and promote good leadership. One of the big psychological processes that comes into play when we talk about leaders and leadership are the dynamics of power. Because leaders have, by virtue of their leadership positions, different forms of power. And this power can be used for positive ends, or it can be used for negative ends. And so distinguishing between what we call bad leadership and good leadership, a lot of it is how those leaders use that power. Leaders use the power that they get from their positions to influence and have impact on their followers. And this can be either good or bad. It can help the followers, it can help the collective, or it can harm the collective. What I often say is that bad leadership is easy and good leadership is hard. And let's talk a little bit about that. Why do I say that bad leadership is easy? Well, it's partly easy because there are these uses of power and influence that leaders can often implement that are easy to use in negative ways, but they're harder to use in positive ways. So a very well-known psychological process is what's called in-group, out-group bias. And in-group, out-group bias comes from our evolutionary ancestors. It's this idea that we feel close to, we feel cohesive and happy with our in-group members, and we're a little bit cautious about group members. It's part of our survival mechanism, right? And so what bad leaders can do is that they can use this to their advantage. They can increase solidarity in the in-group members by vilifying and demonizing the out-group members, right? So, and this is a lot of what happens when we think about the political scene and where we have political divisiveness. And here in the United States, we have very, very terrible political divisiveness because we have just essentially two political parties. And so each of the political parties, one of the ways that they create unity and cohesiveness within their party is by vilifying and demonizing the outgroup members, right? So So this is a tactic that bad leaders can use because it's very automatic in people. And the second thing is we know about the power of obedience. And some of you may have had psychology courses when we talk about Stanley Milgram and his studies of obedience, where he found that in an experiment, people would actually shock and presumably harm an innocent participant in the experiment simply because they were following orders. And again, in the bad use of leadership power, the bad leader demands a sort of blind obedience from followers. And followers, the way it should be used positively is they should willingly follow the leader. Okay, another element, another way that bad leaders can use their power and influence is by creating a climate of fear, is by talking about the negatives, the dangers that face the collective. And this idea of salvation, only I can protect you from harm. And when it comes to difficult problems, only I, the leader, can solve these problems. In extremes, there's appeal to higher forces, that idea of God is on my side, God is with me, with us. And those are examples of the bad use of power and influence. But I don't want to spend time on the bad side of leadership. I want to spend more time talking about good leadership. And a theory that I use that represents good leadership, in part, is called transformational leadership. And what is transformational leadership? Well, transformational leadership includes the notion of charisma, but it's a positive sort of charisma. These are charismatic and visionary leaders. And the transforming in transformational leadership is that there's a transforming of the organization, but it's done through empowering the followers, engaging the followers in the leadership. So one of the things that we know is leaders don't do leadership alone. They do it in collaboration with followers. And a transformational leader, through empowering the followers, that's how they get things done. Now, there's really sort of two types of transformation that occur. And the other form of transformation that a transformational leader engages in is developing the followers, developing their leadership capacity. So these transformational leaders are those who really work to bring out the best in their followers, to improve them, and to develop their leadership capacity. My former colleague, my good friend, Bernie Bass, who's no longer with us, when he started talking about transformational leadership, he said the title of his book was Leadership and Performance Beyond Expectations, because one of the things that research has demonstrated is that groups led by transformational leaders perform at levels beyond what you would expect. So they perform at levels beyond expectations, right? And how is this accomplished? Because leaders motivate the followers in a positive way. They challenge the followers. They challenge the teams to do better. So the original concept of transformational or transforming leadership was in the book by James McGregor Burns, that entitled Leadership. And I just mentioned Bernie Bass and his work, and Bruce Avolio and some other leadership scholars on transformational leadership. And there are four components. So what is transformational leadership made of? Well, it's made up of these four components. And the first is idealized influence. And idealized influence is presenting oneself as a positive leader. This is where the leader is doing the right thing, that trying to benefit both the leader and the followers and the collective. And it's also the area where the leaders are authentic. As I put here, they're walking the talk. They do the right things. The transformational leaders are not the ones who tell the followers, go and do it. They roll up their sleeves and they get involved with the followers. They're usually the first one to take the lead. The second element in transformational leadership, and this also leads to the positive form of leadership, is called inspirational motivation. And this is inspiring people, showing them a vision that involves a sharing of the vision and values of the leader and the followers, aligning the leader's vision and values with those of the followers. So we all want to get there together. So their way that the transformational leader inspires followers is through this visioning and through this very positive inspiring. Now, those two elements, looking like a leader that you want to follow and being able to motivate people, that's where the charisma resides in transformational leadership. But transformational leadership, I sometimes refer to it as charisma plus, because it goes beyond just charisma. And the third component is intellectual stimulation. And this is pushing followers to be creative, to think in new ways, to question the old ways of doing things, to be innovative. And it's through that intellectual stimulation and challenging followers that you get that high levels of performance beyond expectations. And then the last component of transformational leadership, which is a theory of good leadership, helps us understand good leadership, is called individualized consideration. And this is developing that strong relationship between the leader and each follower. And it develops because the leader focuses on what the followers' needs are, what the followers' concerns are, and really tries to satisfy those needs, tries to deal with the followers' concerns, and develops a very, very strong relationship. So individualized consideration is a very, very key element of transformational leadership, and it's a key to developing followers' leadership capacity. So think about this: when a good leader is delegating to followers, they have to have this sort of relationship with them, this considerate relationship with them in order to delegate effectively. So you need to know what an individual, what a follower can do from the leader's perspective, and you have to know what their limitations are. So to delegate, you don't want to overload the follower, but you also want to challenge that person. You want to challenge them to do better, to do better than they have done before. And so these are all the components of a theory of good leadership. Now, we can go beyond just those transformational leader behaviors, and we can talk about leaders who are of good character, because we know there are some transformational leaders who have these skills and abilities that we've been talking about, but they don't always use them in the most positive way. And so to understand a little bit more about leader character, we turn to the ancient Greeks, but there are plenty of Eastern philosophers that also talk about the importance of virtues. And so we turn to virtue ethics to better understand good leadership. And Aristotle suggests that there are four what are called cardinal virtues. And I'll put all these up on the screen. Justice. This is being fair, being equitable, considering other people's needs. And you can see how justice comes into play in transformational leadership, in that individualized consideration. I care about my followers. I know that they're contributing. I recognize their contributions. I don't take all the credit. And, giving credit where credit is due. That's how justice is demonstrated in good leadership. The second cardinal virtue is prudence, and a synonym for prudence is wisdom. And how does a leader demonstrate this prudence, this wisdom, this sort of insight? Well, it's through listening to other people's perspectives, in particular, listening to the followers. So again, engaging with them. And prudence helps the leader to maximize the good that the collective is doing, and minimizes harm. And we'll come back to that later. But prudence, think of it as listening to other people, not thinking you know everything. And this is a key element of good leader character. Third cardinal virtue is temperance, right? Temperance, ability to regulate your emotions, to regulate your passions, right? But it's also where humility lies. And you may have heard about the really top level leaders being humble. And we think of leaders who are arrogant, and the kind of stereotype of leaders is they, think they're better than everyone else. But the really best leaders and those transformational leaders of character are humble. They have humility. Why do they have humility? Because they recognize their limitations. They know that they can always get better as a leader. They can always get better as a person. And it's temperance, the virtue of temperance, that leads to that level of humility. The other issue, too, is that controlling one's passions. And we all can think of famous leaders who fell off of or fell out of their leadership positions, fell off of their pedestals because they gave into their passions, right? Some sort of indiscretion, greed, those negative emotions that pull the leader to the dark side. The fourth cardinal virtue is courage, or fortitude. And courage or fortitude is persevering for a good cause, working hard. We talk about the Nelson Mandelas, perseverance, years and years in prison to overcome apartheid, right? And so you have to have that endurance, that patience, that courage to do the right thing. So these are all critical elements of character, of good leader character. So what can we do in organizations? What can we do in the political scene to increase good leadership? Well, a couple of psychologists, Robert Hogan and Rob Kaiser, suggest that one of the things that we need to do is pay better attention to selection, that we have to select out people who have sort of bad character, negative personality traits, people who are overly narcissistic, people who are overly manipulative. And how can we combat that? How can we work on the other side of that? Well, it's really about a focus on the virtues that we talked about. So if we're selecting out people, we select out people who can't control their tempers, for example, the lack of temperance, or people who are just unfair. They always take credit for other people's contributions, right? So selection, and we don't give enough attention to this. We don't think enough about, weeding out those leaders who, or potential leaders who really have character flaws. They're really not good people, so they aren't going to be good leaders. Second thing to increase good leadership is to focus on evaluation, constantly evaluating leaders and holding them accountable, right? And this is one of the reasons why we appreciate the free press, because the free press works as sort of an objective check and balance on leaders, right? Evaluating their performance, looking at both the good that they're doing, but also the negative things that they're doing. And this is the third way to increase good leadership, is something that we don't really pay enough attention to. And that's to empower followers and to develop followers and develop followership. And what this means is not blind following, right? We need to empower followers, to give them a sense that it's okay for them to follow the leader when the leader's on the right path. But if the leader strays off the correct path, off the good path, then followers need to be empowered. They need to have their own courage to stand up to the leader and to say, no, we refuse to follow any further. You know, this is wrong, and to call out the leader. We also need to develop structures in organizations that protect us from these bad leaders, right? So organizations that have policies against bullying, zero tolerance policies. If a leader bullies a follower, there's immediate consequences, right? Or we create organizational structures that value ethical behavior, doing the right thing, right? Policies around honesty, around transparency. You know, we don't want leaders to tell us one thing and to do another thing. We don't want leaders who have what we call hidden agendas. They say we're really doing this for these reasons, but they have ulterior motives. So we need to think about all of those elements. How do we know good leaders? And one of the things I want to emphasize is that very often when we evaluate our leaders, we focus only on effectiveness. Well, this leader got things done. This leader improved the economy. This leader won the war. All right. And we focus on effectiveness, and we equate effectiveness with good. A leader who's effective is a good leader. And what I'm going to argue is there are two elements here. There's effectiveness, leaders getting things done, accomplishing goals. That's important, effectiveness. But effectiveness does not equal good, right? Good, it refers to whether the leader is doing the right thing and is on the right path and is a person of character, right? Just like we talked about. So here are my basic rules for distinguishing good leaders, all right? So good leaders do the right thing, right? They don't win at all costs. You know, that they don't just have their eyes on a particular goal and achieve that goal regardless of the circumstances of the followers, and they stay on the right path. They do good things, all right? Second, they're responsible, all right? Responsible leaders. In other words, they take the credit and the blame. Credit when they're successful, they're happy to, but they share the credit with followers. But they also then, you know, are responsible. US President Harry Truman had a sign on his desk saying the buck stops here, which what he meant was that ultimately, being the president of the nation, I'm the one, if something goes wrong, I'm the one to blame. The buck stops at my desk because I am ultimately responsible for everything as the highest leader in the nation. So that idea of taking responsibility. Third element that's going to distinguish good leaders is good leaders limit collateral damage. If we think about what kind of damage we're talking about the good leaders don't achieve ends, but at the expense of their followers. They don't, leave their followers by the wayside. They don't exhaust their followers or stress them out. Collateral damage can also be talk about society. They don't damage society, or it could be as concrete as the environment. You know, we don't achieve high profits in our organization, in our company, at the expense of damaging the environment, right? So you limit that sort of collateral damage that's going to occur whenever you try to achieve a goal. And critically important, the fourth thing is developing followers leadership capacity, engaging them. And this is why I use transformational leadership as one model. It's not the only model or theory of good leadership, but it does involve this developing the follower's leadership capacity, and that's critically important. And I think the bottom line here is good leaders. We know we have good leaders because they leave the group, the team, they leave the organization, or if they're at the political national level, they leave the nation better off than they found it. Right? So good leaders, you know, it's hard to find them. But what we need to do is focus more on the good, and the effective. So we want leaders who are effective, and we want leaders who are good. So I hope you learned something about good leadership, about positive leadership, a little bit about transformational leadership. And again, thank you for having me.